Okay, so now we are on to part two, specifically focusing on the war that was the part of World War II that was focused more on the Pacific Ocean and in Asia and Japan and that part of the world. So, the after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan had already been expanding and gaining more land all throughout Asia before Pearl Harbor, but after Pearl Harbor, Japan was really winning in the war in the Pacific, partly because the U.S. was still gearing up and Japan had a pretty strong military at this time. So they had a long series of military successes. Specifically, in December of 1941, Guam and Wake Island fell to the Japanese. Um, and in the first half of 1942, they took control of the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and Burma. Some of these places, like the Philippines and Guam, were U.S. territories. Other places obviously belonged to other countries, and some were independent. But the main gist here is that Japan is taking over much of the islands and the Pacific Ocean and much of China at this time. By mid 1942, finally, Australian and New Zealand forces in New Guinea and Great Great Britain or British forces in India were able to kind of pause and halt the Japanese from expanding anymore. But that doesn't mean that Japan is on the defense yet. So here you can see this is, I think, the same map that you have actually. And so you can see that Japan being here, they started to expand out in all ways in a circle. So you can see here the Philippines, and they had got as far as around here, which is the edge of India. Now, specifically, the turnaround is the Battle of Midway. This is in June of 1942, and this should sound familiar because you already read about it. This is going to be, though, the main turning point in the war in the Pacific, because after this, Japan starts to go on the defense. So the Americans destroyed 3 of the 4 major air carriers. So these are ships that carry airplanes. And so that's a pretty big deal. This is not an easy ship to build. Countries don't have thousands and thousands of them. It's nothing like that. These are huge ships that carry planes. And so we destroyed 3 of their main big ones that were in the Pacific Ocean. So it's a major blow to them. And so now Japan's going to go on the defensive position, and the U.S. and the other allied powers helping there are going on the offensive. So here you can see kind of where the U.S. goes. We start taking back. So this one red line, right, that's showing you the extent of what Japan controlled at the height of its power. These blue lines are showing you the allied powers coming in and starting to take back land. So like, for example, you can see Midway, we took back Midway. Then we took back Wake Island. Then we took back, so we're kind of island hopping and moving closer and closer to Japan. So we're pushing Japan back towards Japan and taking back these lands that Japan had conquered. Now the Allied forces, this is like a slow and very, each island that was like taken back for the Allies was a very difficult, long process. They, again, like I said, kind of moved island to island. It was known as island hopping. And they recaptured, the Allies, including the U.S., recaptured the Philippines in late 1944. This is when we see the first use of Japanese kamikaze pilots. This is where they would load their planes with bombs and purposely, like a kamikaze, like they'd kill themselves, they'd crash into enemy ships to do as much damage as they could. This is when the Allies started to do these massive air attacks on Japanese cities and stuff, kind of like how Hitler had done with Great Britain. Specifically, the Allies conquered the islands of Iwo Jima and Okinawa by June of 1945. This is where you see that famous picture. I can't remember if that's Iwo Jima or Okinawa. I think it's Iwo Jima, but I'm not 100% sure. So the reason, though, that it's significant that we conquer, that the Allies conquered these 2 islands is because that's then the closest to Japan they're going to get. So now it's like, it's inevitable, like we're going to either invade Japan or the war is going to end before that. So one other note is that maybe you guys have heard about this, but Navajo Native Americans have a very, very difficult language to learn. So like it's almost impossible to learn their language if you aren't born learning it and growing up with the language being spoken to. And so many Navajo Native Americans served as code talkers in the Marines. And so basically they would put a coded version of the Navajo language, and they put a message in the coded version of the Navajo language. Then someone on the other end, like in, let's say, Washington, D.C., decoded that Navajo language and then put it back into English for people to read. And the Japanese code breakers were never able to figure it out. So basically what this means is that because of the Navajo code talkers helping out, we were able to get messages back and forth without the Japanese knowing. Now, basically, like I just said, the victories in Iwo and Okinawa opened the way for basically a mainland invasion of Japan, like as a whole country. But Japan still had a huge army that was going to defend their land. And so there's basically a question now, because we have this atomic bomb that's just been built. The question is, should we use it or not? Now, many people said, like, the war's going to last much longer. It would mean a lot more Americans die, like maybe up to 1 million soldiers. And Harry S. Truman, who had just recently become the president after Roosevelt died in May 1945, Truman basically looked to the secret weapon that was created during what's called the Manhattan Project, and that's the atomic bomb was created at this Manhattan Project. And so he has to basically decide, should I use this atomic bomb to try to force Japan to surrender? Or should we just do a mainland invasion of Japan, which could mean the war would last a lot longer and a lot more Americans would die? Here you can see a picture of Hiroshima after the bomb. So Hiroshima was hit with an atomic bomb on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki was hit on August 9, 1945. As a direct result of these bombs, 200,000 or more civilians died immediately. But then it's more than that when you think of radiation and stuff. On August 15th, there was Victory in Japan Day, or Victory over Japan. That's when Emperor Hirohito officially announced the end of the war and surrendered. I want you to add this to your map. So this should be your 8th thing that you're adding to your map, because you had 6 battles you added. You added the date for victory in Europe, and you added the date and the name for victory in Japan now. Okay. I guess the more formal surrender in paper and stuff was September 2nd, 1945, but though we knew the war was ending as of August 15th because of the announcement by Hirohito. Now the question is, did we make the right decision in deciding to drop the atomic bombs? Now in the past, in normal school, I let you guys pick a side and then you actually debate it as a class. Since we can't do that, I'm going to have you kind of debate both sides in writing. You do not have to use Google to help you. I've got 2 slides of information here that can help you, and I also have another article, a short article or thing listed under this assignment on Schoology that could help you as well. So the question we're really trying to answer was it right to use the atomic bombs? Now, some pros are for using the atomic bomb. Basically, there was people that said these 2 cities would have been bombed with regular, like, conventional firebombs anyway, because in order to try to get Japan to surrender, we would have used other bombs on civilian cities. Other people said, look, Japan, like, had kamikaze pilots. They were willing to resist and fight till the very end. Like, this was just a quicker way of getting them to surrender. Other people said an invasion of Japan would have ended up causing more casualties overall than just Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because they said, like, we would have been going through all these civilian cities and accidentally killing lots of civilians. Some people also said that the bomb was used to kind of impress and scare off the Soviet Union so that they didn't demand that we both control Japan. So remember how, like, the Soviet Union, France, the Soviet Union, France, Great Britain, and the U.S. all took a chunk of Germany. Well, when we won in Japan, the Allies won in Japan, it was just the U.S. who occupied Japan after, versus if we wouldn't have used the bomb, some said that that the Soviet Union might have tried to control or have joint occupation of Japan. Now, if we're looking at reasons why we shouldn't have used the atomic bomb on these cities in Japan, some say that, yeah, conventional bombs don't have the same kind of horrible results as, like, radiation can have, because radiation can show up generations later. People also said, look, Japan had to have called it a quit soon. I mean, they basically were stuck in Japan. They couldn't really get any supplies in or out of Japan because we basically controlled all the islands around them. And remember, Japan is weak in natural resources. Like, how long could they have really held out? People said if we would have invaded Japan, a lot of the deaths would have been military and not civilian. And so maybe more would have died, but it would have been at least military and not just civilian. And some said, if you're going to try to sacrifice civilians just to, like, to be a power play for you against the Soviet Union, or just kill civilians to end a war quicker, like, that seems really wrong and unethical. Some other arguments for and against. Some people, and some of these are going to sound similar to the last slide, some people said, look, the war is going to be over really quickly with the use of the atomic bomb. It means the Allies win. It means that basically no more American soldiers are going to die, which is right. Isn't that what the president's supposed to be doing, is protecting the American people? Some people that said, no, we shouldn't have used the atomic bomb, they said, like, this had never been tested in battle. We had a vague idea of what would happen, but we really didn't know what was for sure going to happen. It's only ever been tested for a couple years. Basically, people said, like, is this ethical? Like, shouldn't basically the U.S. fight more fair and not fight dirty like Japan was doing? Because Japan definitely was fighting dirty, but it's like, should we just copy them and do whatever we want? And so, yeah, there was a lot of questions by a lot of people around the world. Was the use of the atomic bomb ethical, or was it fighting clean or fighting dirty? Now, those are the only ones I'm going to go through. That is not the only ones that are listed. There's more listed for sure on that other PDF that's listed under this assignment. You can definitely use that to come up with more ideas too. Now, the war ends, right? Hitler has killed himself. Mussolini and Mussolini in Italy and Germany has surrendered, and now Japan has too. Those are the main three countries fighting on the Axis powers. So what's going on now? What's the effects or results on the world? I mean, a ton, right? I'm obviously in one slide not going to go through all of them by any means. I'm just going to briefly touch on a couple. So obviously we know Europe and Asia is in ruins, both like physically, their cities are destroyed, people are dead, there's people missing, all this kind of stuff, but also economically. I mean, they've fought in a war now for years, and it's expensive, and so their economies aren't doing well. Specifically, there's tens of millions dead. Anywhere from 50 million to 100 million are estimated as dying as direct results of World War II, whether we're talking about military and civilian deaths. The heaviest losses were in Eastern Europe, like the Soviet Union and some of those Eastern European countries like Ukraine and Belarus and Romania, etc. Germany, Japan, and China also suffered very heavy losses, both by like number of people, but like I said before, their economies are near collapse. They have physical devastation of their cities, their villages, their farms. Another result of World War II, though, is the United Nations. That still exists today. This is kind of like the new and improved version of the League of Nations. So the United Nations was meant to encourage international cooperation and prevent wars in the future. And the United Nations is still around today to try to promote those things. Here you can see the heaviest casualties, again, by military dead and civilian dead. So you can see that China had the most on the Allied side, followed by, on the Axis side, the highest casualties, both for civilians and for military, was definitely Germany. All right, so I hope you guys learned a lot. If you need to go back and listen to certain parts of this video, go for it. And then just don't forget to submit it back into Schoology when you're done.